We are almost done with our journey through Hebrews. It will be hard to believe because we read like whole chapters during some worship services this summer, but we're going to spend the next 5 weeks in the last chapter and a half of this book of the Bible, because these are incredibly important verses. These are the type of verses that you will find in paintings or embroidered in a pillow in your grandmother's house, right? These are the big, rich verses of our memories, and so I want to spend a little time with them. Today's scripture is Hebrews chapter 11, the first 4 verses. And it goes like this. Faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we don't yet see. The elders in the past were approved because By faith, we understand that the universe has been created by a word from God, so that the visible came into existence from the invisible. By faith, Abel offered a better sacrifice to God than Cain, which showed that he was righteous, since God gave approval to him for this gift. Though he died, he still speaks through faith. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I did a little experiment this week at VBS. I was the Bible teacher, which of course is the most important job at all of VBS. I was the Bible teacher, which basically means it's my job to make sure the participants go home with something of God. It's the little connecting piece. It's sort of the overarching purpose, right? It's what makes the songs and the crafts and the science and the games important and worthwhile, or that's what I tell myself. This year's VBS was about the armor of faith. Now, the armor of faith is the subject of my husband's very famous, very, very famous favorite sermon of all time. When I was in seminary, we were going to First Presbyterian Church of Pittsburgh, which is an old Gothic stone sanctuary. It's huge. It's got Tiffany windows. And there was this old preacher. He was in his 80s. He'd probably delivered this sermon, I don't know, hundreds of times in his life. But he got up in that pulpit and he preached a fire breath of a sermon to the point that we still talk about it. But it's not something we Presbyterians talk about very much, the armor of faith. We went through all the different pieces of the armor of God, like the breastplate of justice and the belt of truth and all of those things. And one night was about wearing the shoes of peace, which means we have to talk about, what peace is. So I started out about talking about peace, and the very first group I had that night was the kindergartners and the first graders. And so I asked them the question about how we can make peace. And it became very clear to me that no one in that group could define the word peace. They could tell me what a piece of pie was, but they didn't know what peace was. And quick, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to turn to your friend and define peace. Go. Go. But you didn't say which peace. Right, so that's one of the problems, right? Peace has got several different words. Did we come up with a good definition? Anybody feel really confident? Who wasn't at Bible school and didn't hear me tell you what peace is? All right, what's peace? What is peace? Calm, cool, and collected. Right? Mary, faith is peace. Faith brings us peace. I think being kind is an act of peace. Yeah? Positivity can be peaceful. But peace, I'm sure Merriam-Webster has a definition of peace, but as far as being able to define peace in a sentence, I don't think anybody in this room really nailed a definition of the word peace, right? So we started describing peace. We started describing peace by what it is and what it isn't. Peace is when we don't fight. Peace is when we're calm, in the zone, relaxed. Peace is when we feel peaceful, like floating. Peace is not war. Peace is not yelling. You get the idea. Peace, like so many other words, is something we can't describe, but it is difficult to nail down. You know it when you see it. You could feel peace, and you know peace when it's not there, and you know what peace is not, but trying to actually define peace, we are restricted. It's like freedom, or love, or honor, or trust. We often know what a word means by what it is not. We know love by the action that we can see when it happens, and we know true freedom when we see others who don't have it. But even Hebrews struggles to define faith. The author of Hebrews found himself talking and caring for a group of people who were worried about their faith. They worried about not having enough. They worried about if they had the right kind of faith to face the days which were coming. They seemed afraid of faith. They were afraid of faith, that the kind that they had was the wrong kind. And the preacher of Hebrews saw them slowly beginning to back away from the community in which they found themselves. The preacher of Hebrews found them leaving the community because they were worried and unsure about their faith. These early believers, you see, they seem to think that doubt and fear and worry were the opposite of faith. That there was no room for those things in the midst of all of the good news of the gospel. And so the author of Hebrews found himself trying to shore up and to define the undefinable. He goes on to spend most of Hebrews 11 talking about faith by showing examples of what faith looks like. Faith is seen in action. Faith is seen in our attempts to live out faith in our lives on both good days and bad days. But in the end, what we learn is that faith is a gift. Faith is a gift from God. You cannot create it. You cannot earn it. You cannot expand it or shrink it. It can't be lost, but it can be denied. It can be suppressed. So just like you can't be a little bit pregnant, you can't be a little bit faithed. God is the giver of faith. All you can do is choose to open yourself up to the possibilities and hope that faith brings with it. In the struggle to define faith for an audience that was worried about its sufficiency in their life, the author of Hebrews settles on the most beautiful metaphor, though it is itself a little confusing. And he says, faith is the confidence of what we hope for. It's the promise that there is more to the world than what we have yet seen. Faith is hope. Faith is our eyes being open to every time that God's kingdom breaks into the world, every time a little bit of God manages to pierce the clouds of human brokenness. It's our willful attempt to be open to that light. The preacher has spent 10 chapters repeatedly and in detail explaining all the ways Jesus already acted on your behalf. Jesus who chose to become human. Jesus who lowered himself from the high, high places to become a dusty, smelly human person with all the pain and all the suffering and all the sorrows that comes along with that. And he did those things. He made those sacrifices to make it possible for you. Without those things, you are not able to see faith. You are not able to open up your heart to feel hope, even when hope is lost or it seems like it's gone. All of that was done for you and is a gift. It all leads up to this. In this chapter, the author will use the word faith 24 times, and every single time it is a verb. Faith is not an action, it's not a noun, it's not something you hold in your hands. Faith is a verb. It's the ability to see faith as an act, something you do. Faith isn't something you feel. It's not something that you systematize in your head. It's not the things that you believe. Faith is the things that you do and the possibility of hope. Hebrews goes out of its way to tell us faith is not belief. We have in our mind the idea, we have married the two things, that having faith equals what we can say about God. That faith is belief. That faith is the theology that we say with our mouths. This is not Hebrews' vision of faith. Hebrews does not understand faith to look like a system of belief. It's something deeper than that. It's richer than that. It's bigger than that. The author of all of Hebrews reminds us all the ways faith is bigger and stronger and greater than our ability to hold on to it. Faith is remembering that there is more truth in the world than what we can see or feel or touch or understand. Faith is the ability to hope. And it can only be given to us. Our human hearts are too hard. They're too closed off. They're too tight-fisted. They're too deeply wound in mistrust and doubt and fear for faith to unlock the gates unless God is the one doing it. We cannot open ourselves up to a dangerous possibility like hope. We cannot understand the mystery that is beyond reason or logic or even our ability to believe. Jesus tells us that faith is like a mustard seed, the smallest thing in the world. We show faith. But even when our faith is as small as a single grain of yeast, it is enough. It's enough. Hebrews says because our faith doesn't depend on our ability to hold on to it. Jesus is the only one who holds on to our faith, and he does that for us. And so some days, maybe most days, you might feel like you only have a droplet full of faith. But Jesus has a stream of hope. Jesus has more than enough faith for all of us. Our world tells us a lie. It tells us that we can know everything, that we can take everything apart, we can learn all of its little intimate details and reconstruct it back again, that we can possibly know all things, that we can grip a grip on everything. There was a time where mystery was more important than what we know. There was a time when witches were real, when mystery was as valid as knowing and certainty, and that the Pope was the most important figure in the world because he had a direct access to God. And if you went to church, you might very well, which you might never have done, because as a peasant, there may not have been a church nearby. When you went, it was a building filled with secrets, smoke and candle flame and chanting and words that you did not understand, and a ritual of salvation which you were not permitted to be a part of. The world was a mystery. And faith was understood to be something beyond which you could hold your hands. We've changed all that. We have tried as hard as we can to remove mystery, to remove questions from our lives, to ignore and eliminate uncertainty. And I'm just not sure we ever had as much handle on truth as we thought we did. I'm not so sure that we have as much right belief as we think we do. Hebrews reminds us we cannot logic ourselves into faith. There are no arguments, there are no systems, there are no sentences which you can say like a spell to produce faith. When we embrace that there are questions beyond our understanding, that doubt and fear will define us as much and as often as our strong affirmations, and that we acknowledge that faith will always be a gift and a mystery, that is when we are closest to the truth. Hebrew wants us to see faith is not about what happens between our ears, but it is the words written on our hearts. The truth of God's grace is threaded into the very bones of your body. And whatever goes on in that squishy muscle between your ears, faith is as much a part of your existence as air and water, whether or not you ever acknowledge it. It's a gift. Faith is our ability to live into the promise of a future which is not defined by humans, that is not held prisoner to the property of corrupt human beings or the ravages of disease or the oppression of systems which are designed to separate and divide us. It's not held captive to our anger or our hurt. Faith is not ours to own or to control. It doesn't get bigger each time we do a good deed, and it doesn't shrink every time we ask a question. It doesn't increase when we nail an important theological concept or disappear when we doubt or rage at God. Faith is not ours to control. It is God's. And we don't have to do anything with it except open ourselves up to it. And so our challenge is to faith our way through life. It's to step out into the hope that God promises for us. It's to take the risk of living into the future God has asked us to do. And maybe that might be countercultural. Maybe that might ask you to risk something. Maybe it's just a whisper in your ear which says there's more. This is not all that there is. Even if you don't really believe, you can faith. You can. You put faith into action every time you ask a question. You put faith into action every time you witness the faith of a child who hasn't yet learned to doubt. If faith is hope, then we see faith each time we do something that asks us to trust in God. Faith is something that happens to us. It's not something we generate. But it is something we can open ourselves up to. Faith invites us to see beyond. It's a gift from God to you.